Today we're talking about the events going on in the world with regard to Ukraine. I'm sure everyone is very familiar with this. And specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the dark psychology behind Putin with regard to the dark triad and what happens when the power self gets out of control. What we are talking about today is Putin's dark psychology and the power self. So there's this article in Psychology Today called The Danger of Dark Triad Leaders. So what we're going to do is look at Putin's psychology in reference to the dark triad and, very much importantly as well, the power self. So these are the two elements that we're going to be looking at that is driving Putin and the events going on in Ukraine, because it's all about power. That's what it is. It's all about power. So the problem is that Putin has tapped into his power self without integrating the rest of unconscious content. He is identifying with the power self. And in addition to these dark triad traits, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Before we dive into that, let me give a quick description of what the power self is. So you, in your unconscious, have archetypes, which are like mental programs that serve certain purposes. And they can wreak havoc if you don't integrate them properly, which means becoming conscious and aware of them and getting them to integrate together, play well together. And in your unconscious, you have the shadow self, the mirror self, and the power self. Now, I'm going to give a very brief explanation of this. If you want more, check out my video series called Inner Star Actualization. And it's a playlist, and it talks all about this in depth. But in real concise way, because we need to get to this topic about about Putin's dark psychology here and what's driving all the events, psychologically speaking. And that's important, but we have to know what the power self is because some people may be new. So the shadow self is the parts of you that have been repressed into your unconscious because society has told you that they're unacceptable. So as you're growing up, you may do certain things, act a certain way, you get punished, you get reprimanded, etc. That gets relegated to your shadow self and becomes unconscious content. Now, your mirror self are the opposite of your ego self. So it's a subtle difference, but important difference. The shadow self is the parts of your ego self that you denied and repressed, whereas the mirror self is the opposite of your ego self that resides in the unconscious. So I could talk for hours about this, but this has everything to do with basically your inner opposite with regards to like introvert, extrovert, thinking, feeling, reason, intuition, and even getting into the realms of gender and the whole spectrum that's relegated there, male, female, and everything in between on that spectrum that is a reflection and opposite of you in your unconscious. Now, if you don't fully understand what these mean, that's fine, because today's topic is about the power self and the dark triad as well, which is a separate concept. Okay, just FYI, dark triad is something completely different, completely separate. Okay, so that's a thing in psychology. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about yet, but we will soon. So the power self is a little, it's actually simple, but it's very difficult to explain. But bear with me here and it will be easy. So the power self is your inner power, your inner fire, your inner furnace. And it is the most dangerous archetype to tap into and integrate, because if you do it incorrectly, it leads to disaster, because now you have become possessed by power and a lust for power, but you haven't integrated your shadow self, which means you have a ton of repressed elements that like anger, addiction, selfishness, ton of things that haven't been healthily integrated. And your mirror self hasn't been healthily integrated. This can lead to like even hating the opposite sex, or with regard to gender, the opposite gender. It can lead to being completely unbalanced in not being able to control your emotions or whatever. So when you integrate the power self, when you tap into the power self, you want to make sure you're also integrating the others, because if you don't, it's extremely dangerous. It's like an unstable nuclear reactor. It will cause destruction. So again, to really get a grasp on what the power self is, it's a good way to understand what the power self is via power self projection. So think about people that you admire, that you just think are amazing. Think about characters that you relate to in movies, in books, in video games, whatnot. That's a good way to start getting an understanding of what your power self is, because you're power self projecting. The reason why you like these people, not all the time, but most of the time, or at times, a lot of the time, it's power self projecting, meaning you admire these qualities because you might not know this consciously, but unconsciously you want to, they're a part of you that you can integrate and actualize. So again, look at the people you admire, look at maybe the heroes in movies or even villains, because villains often have good qualities too. Villains are, aren't all, say they can have power to build and construct, but heroes, villains, books, movies, just think about characters you relate to and the aspects of them that you admire. And it's very possible that this is part of your power self. So because you're power self projecting and you're admiring them, but what you want to do is integrate it so you become it and not something else. But on the topic of villains, let's talk about that for a minute. Because what happens is if you become power self possessed, if you identify with the power self, because that's the thing, you don't want to identify with these things. The power self isn't you. You're the entirety of your psyche. You are the higher self. You're everything. So the power self is a part of you. But if you identify with the power self, that's when a problem happens, because you identify with it and you haven't healthily integrated the other elements into consciousness. So a good example of this, of a healthily integrated power self, an example of this, we can use archetypes in film, in movies. Gandalf in Lord of the Rings is a really good example of someone who has integrated their power self, very powerful being, but is also benevolent and helpful and compassionate because they have also integrated the rest of themselves as well, the shadow self, the mirror self, etc. So that's a great example of a healthily integrated power self. Now, the opposite, power self identificate. If you identify with the power self and don't integrate the other aspects, what is that? That's like Sauron. That's like Darth Vader. Prime examples of an unintegrated power self, I'm sorry, not unintegrated, power self identification, because they haven't integrated the rest of themselves. They haven't integrated the shadow self or the mirror self. So they have identified with the power self, and now they just have this mad lust for power, this mad lust for domination. But guess what? All that unintegrated content is what's driving that. So that, shadow self that could be very selfishness, very, very domineering, very angry, all that is driving the actions of the power self, which you have identified with. So do you see? The power self is magnificent, extremely powerful. I mean, look at, like Vader and the Sith taking over the galaxy, Sauron trying to take over Middle Earth. It's very powerful, but extremely volatile and destructive if you haven't integrated the other parts of yourself. So you want to, okay. So I think that's a pretty good overview of what the power self is. Now we're going to look at this in terms of what's going on in Ukraine and Putin and everything related to that. So this is an article in Psychology Today called "The Danger of Dark Triad Leaders, the Link Between Psychological Disorders and Power." So just so you know, dark triad, that's something completely different. We haven't talked about that yet, but we will soon. So the sheer horror of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is so shocking that it's difficult to process. It's hard to believe that a leader and his wider government can be so malevolent and destructive. It seems like a return to an earlier, more brutal era of European history. Now, if you look at this, what is all this? It's a lust for power. You can see a power self gone mad. You can see just in everything that's motivating it and driving it, rather than a world that's, and it's not like it's just him. There are many other world leaders that have the same problem. I mean, look at Trump. Trump is another example. But you can see this mad lust for power and domination rather than working together and creating a beautiful world where we can operate in harmony together. That's what a healthy integrated power self would do. A healthily integrated power self would use that momentum, would use all that power to create a connected world in a healthy way where we're all living together and able to actualize our true selves, about collective growth. So you see the big difference here. The power self is not bad, but it's being directed by volatile unconscious content that hasn't been integrated. So you're giving domination, you're getting, just this eruption of terror and that is caused by this lust for power. So the war highlights the link between psychological disorders and political power. It was the British historian and politician, Lord Acton, who coined the famous phrase, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." However, this phrase doesn't take account of another factor, that power attracts people who are already corrupt, who become even more corrupt once they attain power. So it's a very, this power is like a drug for them. It's addiction. And power in itself is not a bad thing. It's when you want to have power over others in a domineering way that it's a bad thing. Again, the power self is not something you want to ignore. It's great. It's fantastic. It's your fire. It's your power. But if you haven't integrated the other aspects of yourselves, absolute corruption. Now, while some psychologists like to think in terms of specific disorders, like psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder, I prefer, like many psychologists nowadays, to think in terms of a dark triad of 3 personality traits that appear together: psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. This makes sense because these traits almost always overlap and are difficult to distinguish from one another. All right, so now you're going to see a lot of overlap of even what we were talking about, because these are psychological structures that develop in the mind. So dark personalities crave power. Dark triad personalities crave power and find powerful positions easy to attain because of their ruthlessness and manipulative skills. Since they lack empathy and conscience, they have no qualms against deceiving and exploiting other people in their rise to the top. Now, do you see, here's something I really want to emphasize. Being able to be manipulative, well, it's a bad thing. You don't want to manipulate people, right? But being able to effectively because the thing is, these people are effective. They're powerful. They are effective. They're very effective. Doesn't mean they're doing good things. Doesn't mean that they're intelligent. It just means they can get the job done. But the thing is that if they had a healthily integrated psyche, they could use those talents to get the job done in a healthy way. So it's not really, it's the things that they're doing, and it's not their, do you see what I mean? Like, you could use it in a very benevolent way. You could use it in a positive way if you have those other aspects. It's like a fire. You have to be able to contain it. It's like gasoline in a car. You want to put gasoline in the car, but if it gets out of control, it could start fire everywhere. So anyway, I just want to make that clear that certain things aren't necessarily bad in themselves. It's how they are used. So since they are often charismatic and charming, they often gain the support of ordinary people who are impressed by their apparent confidence and decisiveness. Now, what's happening here? They're attracting groups, supports of people who are impressed by them. What's happening here? We talked about this a little earlier. The people that are attracted to this person are power self-projecting. So what that means is that they are seeing this person who is powerful, and they worship that person rather than making themselves powerful. Now, it doesn't mean like they should make themselves an evil dictator or anything like that, but working on becoming better versions of themselves. more actualized versions of themselves. So you have this person who is a very conniving and effective individual that has identified with their power self and has a lust for power. They're not power self projecting. No, they don't power self project. They don't look at someone and be like, oh, I want to worship them, I want to support. No, they identify with the power self and they accumulate power. And then groups of ordinary people power self project on them and then want to support them, worship them, treat them like gods and heroes because they unconsciously want power. So in my view, some of the suffering that has filled human history since the beginning of the 20th century has been caused by psychologically disordered dark triad leaders. Before the 20th century, inheritance-based systems of power restricted access to leadership roles. But once these social structures broke down, and particularly if they weren't replaced by democratic systems, the most brutal and amoral individuals tended to rise to the most powerful positions. That's scary, right? We have a world that actually allows the worst people imaginable to rise to the top. I've talked about that in some other videos as well. That's very dangerous. From Hitler to Mussolini to Stalin to Saddam Hussein, you name it. So towards the end of the 20th century, most of Africa and South America was ruled by ruthless, amoral dictators who inflicted massive amounts of suffering on their own people. So, dark triad traits in power. Now, just to be clear, because I don't want to be confusing, the power self and the dark triad are separate concepts. But you can see a lot of crossover in that these dark triad traits are used in conjunction with an individual who has identified with their power self to get power. It's the way, so you see the dark triad traits are the means by which the individual who has identified with their power self accumulates power. And just to reiterate again, the power self is not bad, but identifying with it is bad and not integrating the rest of your psyche. The political actions of dark triad leaders are simply an extension of their personality traits. For example, one of the traits of dark triad leaders is a constant desire to accumulate. Exactly what I just said. They seem to feel a deep sense of inner lack, which drives them to constantly try to collect more power, wealth, fame, and success. This is what drives them to become leaders in the first place. And once they become leaders, they project this impulse onto their nations. As a result, they are nationalistic, obsessed with increasing their nation's power and prestige. Now, important point here. They have this desire to accumulate because they seem to feel a deep sense of inner lack, which drives them to constantly try to collect more power, more wealth, more fame, and more success. So you have this individual that has identified with their power self. It's like a drug to them. It's like an addiction. They want more power. But even though they're getting all this power, they still feel this inner lack. It's not satisfying. So they want more power and more power, just like someone who does a certain substance and they start to build a tolerance. So they have to do more and more and more. Same kind of similar scenario here. You have this individual who has identified with the power self. They want power, but they want more and more. But they have an inner lack. It's never satisfied. Why is it never satisfied? It's never satisfied because what are they looking for? They're looking for wealth, fame, success, domination over others. The problem is that's not true power. That's false power. That's illusory power. That's what one thinks is power when they haven't integrated the rest of their psyche. What true power is self-actualization and universal actualization. So actualizing yourself is true power along with actualizing, helping others to actualize. It's the two top tiers of Maslow's extended hierarchy, self-actualization and transcendence, which is transcendence meaning helping others to self-actualize. This is true power. Now, look at what's going on. The exact opposite. Is Putin helping people self-actualize? No. he is domineering and dominating, wanting to spread, sphere of influence. And this is just this lust for power because of this addiction to power, because of a misunderstanding of what power is, and an unintegrated, very unhealthy psyche. So they promise a great future where the nation can regain its prestige. They also usually hark back to mythical great pasts when the nation once possessed power and prestige, which has now ebbed away. In their nationalistic fervor, they see themselves in competition and conflict with other nations. They withdraw from international agreements, stubbornly insisting that they can prosper alone. So now this power self has been flooded across an entire nation. Now this entire nation is acting towards the will of this one individual. So now you have a nation wanting to spread its influence, but retreat from cooperating with others. You see this whole idea. And I'm not saying that, oh, it's only Putin. No, most, if not all, world leaders are intensely corrupt. I'm sure you could find some that are fine. I don't want to take time thinking about them, but most world leaders today are extremely corrupt. In at least that they haven't integrated their psyche, so they don't really know what the fuck they're doing. That's the problem with the world. The world doesn't know what power. The world doesn't know what the world is. The world doesn't know what we are, where we are, or why we're here. So the world leaders are like captains of a ship that have no idea where they're going. Where are you leading people towards? You have these world leaders. What's the goal? A leader implies a direction, a point to arrive at. What's the goal? So you have these world leaders that have no idea what they're doing, no clue what even existence is about, no clue what power is about. And that's why in Hyperianism, we want to build a world that is teleological. So it's directed, purposefully directed towards the self-actualization of every individual and the collective as a whole. Attaining true absolute power for every individual as we step into what you could call our divinity. I know that's a religious word. I don't particularly like using that, but it's that fully unleashed power where you have become the best version of yourself together as a collective as well, helping each other learn, grow, understand. That's the direction. That's where healthy world leaders would be directing all of us together. But no, these world leaders have no clue what the fuck they're doing. They have no clue. They have no direction. And so you have this absolute madhouse of a world that is insane and divided against itself. If you think of the world like a mind, it's like this disordered mind, insane, a literally insane mind. If you think of the world collective as a mind that's fighting against itself because it doesn't realize that it's part of one system. That's the thing. When we educate people to what the world is, we won't have these problems because these problems will melt away because they're obvious. When you understand what existence is, the solutions to these problems are obvious. So you wouldn't have these nations going to war with each other because, same reason why, you wouldn't cut off your own hand. You wouldn't do that because you understand that it's a part of you. And so you need to find a way to work together. And when you all have that understanding together, along with a lot more, so much more that I need to get into, don't have the time right now, but you understand what I'm saying, is that once people understand, this is why we stress hyper-awareness so much, because once people understand where we are, what we are, why we're here, then these problems are no longer problems. You just take the knife out. You stop trying to saw your hand off. It's extremely, they're non-problems. Anyway, let's continue with today's topic here. So this is also why they often follow expansionist policies to try to increase the nations and by extension their own power and wealth. But again, it's never going to satisfy them because it's not true power and they're going to want more and more and more. They feel impelled. I mean, why the fuck would you even want to do that? Like, again, think about the goal. What's the goal here? All right, you want to dominate the world? Okay. So, and then what? You've dominated the world. What now? Like, just eat your popcorn and you're done? You did it? Like, what, once you dominate, what are you going to do? What's the goal? And the thing is, in a Hyperion New World, in New Terra, we absolutely have a goal. When the world acts unified, we're here to self-actualize, actualize ourselves, and teleological strive towards perfection. So, they felt impelled to try to increase their nation's territory, to conquer other nations, and build an empire. This was the impulse which led Hitler to try to create his Third Reich. And it is impulse that lies behind Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So now, destructiveness. Dark triad leaders are authoritarian, as they have a limitless desire for power. They love to project an image of toughness and follow hardline policies restricting people's rights and increasing punishments. So here's a clear, unintegrated aspect of the mirror self. You have these individuals who are defined like this gendered definition of what it means to be a man according to this society. So they want to be this tough, strong, unfeeling, powerful. I mean, look at Putin's interviews, just emotionless. Look at his videos, his pictures that he took with his shirt off, right, riding horses and whatnot. You know, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's unintegrated, it's imbalanced. You can see that he has identified with this masculine role of being tough, dominating, and unfeeling. Now, tapping into integrating the mirror self would allow you to access all the opposite of those things, right? It doesn't to understand that it's okay to feel emotion. It's okay to feel compassion. You need to be compassionate towards others. You need to be able to show emotion. Everyone should be able to do so. Doesn't mean you can't still be powerful. Doesn't mean you still can't be strong. Absolutely you can. But you can also be compassionate. And you see, this is a clear example. Unintegrated mirror self leads to this horrible idea. So they often see themselves as guardians of a nation's tradition with a role to resist any progressive developments. However, despite their desire to appear as strongmen, dark triad leaders are usually highly insecure people who can't endure criticism and dissent. Expressions of, and again, this is a perfect example of an unintegrated shadow self, right? You have someone who is, has this problem in that they're very insecure. But guess what? They probably don't know this. They probably would deny it. That's what it means. When something is unconscious, you by definition don't know that it exists. So if you have this unconscious insecurity, you would absolutely deny. You may even project and hate insecure people because it unconsciously reminds you of your own insecurities. So again, you can see all these problems stemming from unintegrated aspects of the psyche unconsciously in the background driving the power self. So who's in control of the power self? Not Putin. The unconscious aspects of Putin. All the insecurities, all the lusts for power, all the unintegrated aspects. Now, of course, I'm being a little flowery with the language by saying Putin isn't in control. Putin's ego is in control to a certain extent, but there's unconscious forces that are making those ego choices happen. They're making them occur. They don't know that it is, but it is. So expressions of disapproval, expressions of disapproval conflict with their grandiose self-image. As a result, they can't endure people with different views, and they pack governments with sycophant loyalists. Their sensitivity to slights is one of the reasons why they restrict freedom of the press and fill media channels with their own propaganda. It's simply too much for them, their fragile egos, to tolerate a steady stream of commentary and criticism through different media channels. So here's the thing. I need a glass of water. They have these insecure egos. They're packing their governments with yes men, sycophants, loyalists. Get rid of anyone who has a contrary view or opinion. What would we do in Hyperion New Terra? We actually want conflicting views because we understand that reality is powered by the dialectic, which is a clash of opposites. So we want conflicting views. We absolutely do, because that is what drives progress. People who have differing views, and then a clash, and then coming to a higher view. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, to put it in a very simplified form. So we will never be free of a clash until the omega point, until the point of complete and total absolute unity in every single way. So much unity that the entire space-time world and universe no longer exists, because space-time automatically entails some kind of disunity, even in length and depth. And all right, let me not get into that. But the idea here is we want to encourage conflict in a healthy way. So what does that mean? Totally ending war. No more physical war at all, but only a war of ideas where the only casualties are bad ideas. That's the only kind of war we want. We don't want, hell no physical war. And here's the other thing too. War is kind of putting it, again, in sort of flowery language. What it really is more like a competition, because you can have conflict that's enjoyable. So if you look at, any kind of sports event, I don't know much about sports, but if you look at things like this is a clash, it's a conflict, but it's done in a healthy way. It's done in a way where it's even enjoyable. So you can develop dialectical clashes that are just competitions, healthy competitions. So there is a terrible destructiveness at the heart of dark triad leaders, perhaps because they live in a state of complete disconnection and feel a deep sense of lack. They feel a deep malevolence towards the world and human beings. It's almost as if they are on a mission to cause as much as chaos and devastation as possible while in power, to kill people, to bomb countries, to destroy institutions, and to damage the environment, or to roll back rights and regulations. Some of their actions appear gratuitous, purely for the sake of causing damage, like young children who trample on other children's toys or knock down sandcastles just for the sake of it. It's very true. So it is very much like children who haven't developed the ability to work together with other children. And via Freudian psychology, it's like they're id driven. They're driven by all their dark, instinctual impulses and are not integrated. Now, of course, such leaders don't work alone. Once dark triad leaders gain power, moral and responsible people rapidly fall away, and other dark triad personalities collect around them. The government quickly becomes what Polish psychologist Andrew Lebakowski referred to as pathocracy, a government made of individuals with personality disorders. I mean, how fucked up is this world, where not only are you getting the absolute worst people imaginable, the most unintegrated people imaginable. I mean, really, you're getting the worst kind of people imaginable, because the systems that we live in rewards those people, and they get to power, because it's just those who can manipulate and con their way to the top. Not only that, we have a world where governments are made of individuals with personality disorders. You couldn't design a more fucked up world than it is. This is why we absolutely need to transform it. So in my opinion, the above factors may help explain the actions of President Putin. It is impossible to understand his behavior in any rational way because it is irrational. It is impossible to judge his actions by normal human standards because his actions are inhumane. All we can do is try to protect ourselves against the pathology of political leaders and try to counter their malevolence with morality. Lobachzewski said that all pathocracies ultimately fail because the amorality and brutality of the ruling elite is not shared by the majority of the population. I hope that holds true in this case. Well, let's hope. Power self-projection is a very powerful thing, and the masses often fall for it. But there's always, that hope that the people won't take it. So, as you can see, identifying with the power self leads to disastrous results. And individuals who use these dark triad powers to increase their power without integrating their psyche, without integrating the shadow self, without integrating the mirror self, wreaks absolute devastation. And you can see that right now with the actions of Putin. This is the problem. Putin has identified with his power self, has obviously not integrated his shadow or mirror self, like obviously. Just looking, you can see this looking at his interviews. You can see this in the photos that he takes clearly. And this has led towards this lust for power while always being empty because he doesn't know what true power is. True power is becoming your true self by actualizing your psyche and then helping others to do that too. Wouldn't that be great if these individuals that are effective used their ability to be effectiveness towards helping build a better, more integrated world? That would be, this world is insane. It's eating itself alive. It's a madhouse. Once you understand what reality is, why we're here, it all becomes obvious what needs to be done. It's not even a question of it. It's just blatantly obvious. Like having a knife in your chest. Obviously, you take it out. You don't keep stabbing yourself. It's clear. So the world as a whole, because we're talking about the individual psyche of Putin, but the world as a whole is an aggregate of its individual minds. So we can think of the world as a whole as being a single mind composed by all of us together. So when you take all of us together and sort of it operates as a single mind, the world collective also has an unintegrated shadow self, unintegrated mirror self. So because we exist in a feedback loop. As individuals self-actualize and become integrated, the whole becomes self-actualized and integrated. So we need to transform the world. And one way to do that, a very powerful way to do that, is by making the unconscious conscious. That's where it starts, because you have to know where you're going. We can talk about transforming the world all day by, different methods and different, educating people. And, case in point, that's why my goal through Hyperianism is education. Because in order to create a new world, first and foremost, it's education. Because you have to know where you're going. You can't create a new world if you don't know what the new world is supposed to be or what it looks like or what the purpose is. So we need to transform ourselves, transform the world, spread this information so that we can have a society that's not built on domination and corruption and greed and power and destruction just for the sake of destruction itself, but a world that's aiming for the self-actualization of every individual and the collective. That's New Terra. And remember, if you're interested in more about these different archetypes and structures of the mind, check out my playlist called Inner Star Actualization. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports on Patreon, and a big shout out to Trent and John, our latest gold tier supporters. Thank you so much, as well as Cassidy, Renaissance Fairy, Michael, Evie, Alan, Angela, and Brian. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. If you'd like to support on Patreon, if you feel like you've ever learned something or gotten something from my videos, consider supporting. It helps out a lot and ensures that I continue to create. You get access to our weekly secret live streams and hidden Discord server, The Citadel. The link will pop up right over here. Thank you very much.